What was that about?
White people are inferior.
White people are inferior?
I did that because I wanted to call the police.
You phone through that my girlfriend is white because white people are inferior?
Yeah, I don't have anything else to say to you.
You know what, so you might have seen this video, you might not have. One thing that is particularly interesting is I had to search for the video, obviously, and there's only 2 videos of it remaining. But when I went onto the internet earlier, a couple of hours ago, it was all over, because it was going viral, and now there's only 2 videos. And I've really specified. I put woman says white people are inferior, Camden, to really narrow it down, because it happened at Camden in North London. The lady involved, just going to click back on it. The lady involved, she sounds Scottish, and she looks drunk, perhaps, but a lot of your true nature comes to the surface when you're drunk. Amplified emotions, etc. I'll just play a bit more. We're all she got, if for anyone, yeah, you can see it there, all the food in her hair and on her clothes and that.
Yeah, we'll keep following now. We'll find out where you were. Yeah, well, it's going to go viral. What are you running away for?
If you haven't seen it, she gets handcuffed later on. My little 10 pence on it. Well, I do wonder a little bit about these videos, whether or not some of them are staged in order to keep the friction going, the tensions going between the races. Because, for example, watched the Paul Joseph Watson video earlier, where apparently the police are training for civil unrest, and the people that the police are kind of training to go against have Union flags on them. So in other words, getting ready for another Southport.
Looks like some.
Another Southport incident like last year. I've heard that before, that basically the biggest threat in their minds is this mythical far right, which in reality is just British people who've finally had enough, and they call us far right. There you go. So there's a Union flag on the guy's arm. If you haven't seen it, Paul Joseph Watson did a video on it earlier, so you can go and watch it there. But yeah, it makes me wonder whether all the world's a stage, whether these videos are kind of orchestrated and acted out in order to keep the division going as best as possible, in order to hopefully cause a massive civil unrest and order out of chaos. Basically, the more chaos they create, the more order they can bring in. Who knows, we could have like a proper what was that movie with Christian Bale? Was it Equilibrium? Where they're all kind of taking pills, like similar to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where they take like pills to subdue them, basically. But I think them pills are to kind of make them happy, whereas Equilibrium is all about sedating them. There it is, yeah, so it was Equilibrium. Sedating them. There's a real war on art, anything inventive, imaginative, kind of turning humans into complete drones, where we don't really see each other's skin colours. They all wear like communist clothing where they're all identical. Really a complete equal, making everybody equal, which is communism essentially. But as usual with communism, we've got an upper class of society that don't really play by the rules, whilst everyone that serfs obviously do, and are subjugated to sort of a totalitarian regime. Sorry, I'm laughing at myself there because I go off on total tangents, grows arms and legs when I start rambling. So I do wonder whether it's authentic or not, that video. But that being said, I can remember walking across Westminster Bridge this week on Wednesday when I was there for the St George's stuff, and there was a big fat lady, an African lady, and she had a t-shirt on saying, "Africa, your time is now." I couldn't be arsed getting into an argument with her filming her and getting into an argument. I just observed it, and it's the obvious thing. If this video is authentic with this woman here, because it could be, because like I said about that woman on Westminster Bridge with the Africa, your time is now. The irony is, of course, she stood on Westminster Bridge in Northwest Europe. So if Africa was so amazing, you'd still be there. Same with this lady. She's Scottish. Well, she's definitely not Scottish. She lives, potentially has been born and raised in Scotland, and now she's down in London. I can assure you, no Africans built either of them places. It was Northwest Europeans. I won't say British people. I say Northwest Europeans, as I've covered before. Irish people recorded navvies, digging out the canals. The Anglo-Saxon, Scandinavian brain, engineering brain that came up with the idea for this network, but they relied heavily on Celtic sort of labour, Celtic graft. The Dutch obviously were extremely influential with levelling places up, for example, like Cambridgeshire. The vast majority of Cambridgeshire was made by the Dutch, and the natives of that area, which would have been Anglo-Saxon Celtic people, would have lived on islands. For example, like Ely was an island, but the Dutch came along, drained the canals, and obviously now you've got like quite a nice, peaceful sort of canal area, which could easily go back to being like a big water world, like it was in once upon a time, sort of interconnected with the sea. But yeah, so if white people are inferior, then why have you moved to northwest Europe? Why didn't you go and live in bloody Africa, which must be like Wakanda? Definitely not people living in mud huts and doing female genital mutilation and etc. etc. The shit old third world conditions. And let's face it, Birmingham now is a good example of what happens when people of African descent and Asian descent take over towns and cities. It becomes like Birmingham, a shithole, a rat-infested dump, still reliant on white British men to come and do the bins and maintain the roads. And the same can be said for Bradford. And also London. London became white British minority in 2011. And out of that, a massive riot broke out. And now there's murders every day, there's stabbings every day. And it's normally the usual suspects are involved. The whole thing with white people being inferior, well, I actually don't like having to make this video because I'd rather we all got on. Africans live in Africa, Asians live in Asia, Europe for Europeans, and the Anglosphere, etc. But the whole thing about white people being inferior, well, let's face it. I think white people make up about 8% of the world population, and that's being generous. I think we are actually about 6% now. But let's say I'll be generous and say 8%. So you can say 4% of that are men, 2% of that will be fighting age men. So 2% are fighting age men, and out of that you've got Tom Stoltman, the world's strongest man. You've had Tyson Fury, Alexander Usyk, the world heavyweight boxing championship was competed between them. You've got the bare knuckle boxing champion, who's a Geordie lad, can't remember his name, apologies. This is off the cuff. And that's all bread and circus stuff, don't forget. That's before you get onto things like engineering, building, constructions. It's mainly white people orientated, really, isn't it? But to conclude on, I have to say the absolute cheek that you come to live in Europe. You live in this luxury life, and when you have the nerve to start slagging white people off, you should be grateful for the society that was built by the people you detest so much and say are inferior to you. If we are inferior to you, go back to your native Africa, which you love so much, and go and turn it into some European grand paradise of amazing architecture and history and arts and culture and science and all the rest of it. But we know you can't, without being rude, I don't think you really can do that. There was an interesting image I saw recently about railways around the world, and guess which area didn't have any railways? Sub-Saharan Africa. Other than obviously the stuff that the British left behind and the Dutch left behind, and the French, all the empires of the past, but Sub-Saharan Africa hasn't got fuck all in terms of railways. Where it has is Europe, America, all the places where the Europeans have been. So if you can come back to me with anything, I'm more than game to take it on board and listen. But I don't think we are inferior. 2% of the world population, which is fighting age men, are the strongest men in the world, and also arguably the best at fighting. I've just remembered Tom Aspinall, another British lad, who's going to be competing for the world heavyweight MMA championships. So that's a tiny minority that are involved in the strongest men and also the hardest men. And then you've got Rico Verhoeven, the world kickboxing legend. Who else have you got? I could go on and on, let's face it. But for a tiny minority of 2% to be that heavily involved and that influential in the world, and that's before you mention musicians and artists and all the rest of it. Let's face it, the Beatles, Oasis, Rolling Stones, The Verve, The Smiths, all these AC/DC, all these legendary bands, we all know what demographic they're from. So, but I don't actually like having to make this video. I don't like the races competing against each other because it's feeding into the system that these people want. But ultimately, this is the end result of a multiracial society. I'm going to conclude there, but please feel free to comment on anything different, any different opinions. That's it. Cheers. A little bonus as well. It's something that's just come to mind. If you think back to the George Floyd incident, obviously a much bigger incident because someone was killed in that incident, allegedly, presuming that isn't another thing that's sort of staged. There was international media outrage. There was coverage for weeks. When the races were reversed, there's no media outrage, and if anything, there's a cover-up. You can see it on YouTube already. They're already trying to reduce the amount of views this video gets. So I suppose that goes against what I was saying before about this being staged. This is probably authentic. So, yeah, but to get to my point, is basically it's a total double standard as usual from the media. This should be like a media outrage. Perhaps one of the local newspapers will cover it, but it's not going to go on and on. It's not going to cause worldwide riots of White Lives Matter or anything like that, is it? So, again, you've got the double standard issue. One other thing that came to mind as well was on Facebook, I'll often see AI-generated images that black people have created to say they were the original rulers of Europe, they were the Moors, they ruled over Europe, they created everything. I have to, and they do the same with Asia as well, the Oriental Asia. I have to notice though, you don't ever go on about your own culture. You're just trying to join in on other people's cultures, and that kind of tells me the lack of your own culture and your own history. Again, I don't like having to say all this, but I think it's kind of true, because if you're having to use other people's cultures for your own, well, really that just means you haven't got much of your own culture, have you? You haven't got a very solid foundation to have to lean on someone else's. And that's it. Cheers.